You can start in chapter 18 with me, Proverbs 18. Not often we're in an entire day given to one book. We continue our study through Proverbs. Remember that I am suggesting to you that there are 6 main themes in the book. We spent 2 weeks on the topic of speech in Proverbs, the quality of speech and the quantity of speech. And this evening we will begin another one of those topics, and we're going to begin a study on the aspect of family in Proverbs. Now, we've already spent some time in parenting, because remember we went through chapters 1 through 9 to build the foundation for the Proverbs beginning in chapter 10. And there is a great deal dedicated to parenting, and there is still yet more to come. But tonight we are going to begin, and we may be able to do it in one session, and just look at the aspect of marriage in Proverbs. And so tonight we're going to look at the concept of marriage, and this is a deeply practical study. And I think I want to make sure that we start with the right backdrop for marriage, and then we'll give some information about marriage, and then we will give some positive and negative examples that we clearly see in the book. All right. So when I was in undergrad at Bob Jones, so of course I was sitting in pastoral studies, and they had this class in our program. They called it the Preacher Boys class, which admittedly most of the preacher boys didn't really like being called preacher boys, but that's what they called the Friday gathering. And it was when all of the undergrad ministerial majors and all of the seminary students would meet together, and a pastor or a professor or someone would come, and he would address the entire class. That would take place Friday mornings at 10 o'clock, freshman through junior year. And the reason they changed it in senior year is because we had weekly sessions that we had to go through as seniors, and so it changed then. But I remember vividly, if you were to ask me if you could boil down, what do most guest speakers, because on Friday they were guest speakers, typically they weren't usual teachers in the school, or they were local pastors or friends of the school or something like that. What did that time on Friday, what was the common theme, or what were common themes? And I would say most of them talked about endurance and faithfulness and character, but most profoundly, what sticks out in my mind is the amount of times, either in passing, and Kevin remembers this, I'm sure he would agree, either in passing, or we went to the same school, not the same time, same school. And either in passing, or they would give attention to this topic. They would say something to the effect of, if you get married, marry the right person. I mean, constantly, these men would go out of their way, almost weekly. Hardly a week went by where a godly man didn't say, in ministry, you have to be careful who you marry. Now, certainly it's not just true of ministry. And I think at the time, there were these stereotypes about who in the ministry class, people like me, would grow interested in or begin to date. And usually it was ladies who were in the counseling program and could play the piano. Like, that was the stereotype, Because if you're going to be a pastor, your wife needs to be able to counsel and play the piano. And fortunately, I lucked up in that regard. But now that I'm older, I understand those men weren't speaking to the stereotypes. They were speaking to much more vital matters. And this is not an address on how hard it is to be a pastor's wife, but it is hard to be a pastor's wife. You have to have a certain kind of resolve. What Solomon is going to do in Proverbs similar to this idea of a man in ministry needing to give great consideration to his wife. What Solomon is going to do is he's just going to, like those men were doing in Friday ministry class, he's just going to lay a foundation for how important the right kind of spouse is. So before he does deal with what is the right kind of spouse and what should you be looking for in these kinds of ideas. But the heart of Solomon's concern is just that you marry a good spouse. Be discerning. And why is he concerned that way? Well, because we have to remember, he's speaking to his sons, and so you should know from the outset, most of the marital advice given is in regards to ladies, all right? He addresses wives a lot in Proverbs. Why? Because he wants his sons to marry good wives. And of course, we understand that there's a reciprocal relationship there, so there'll be reciprocal application. But before we get to what is a good spouse, and what are the attributes of a good spouse, and what makes up a good spouse, I want to, with Solomon, make sure that we understand the beauty and profundity of what takes place in marriage. And so we'll talk about that in just a minute. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you so much for your grace and your wisdom towards us. We ask that you would use this time to be instructive, that it would contribute to the health of this congregation. It would build up families. It would strengthen homes. We want to build godly families and strong homes at Grace Bible Church. And so I pray that this time would contribute to that. Help me to be a godly and wise husband. Help the men here to be loving, sacrificial, self-giving, thoughtful, understanding husbands. Help the ladies, the wives, to be encouraged with this truth tonight. Would you give life to marriages by your word tonight? In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I understand when we talk about a topic like this, there's immediately some that it isolates your situation in life. And I wanted to speak to that for just a moment. And one of the ways I wanted to speak to that is to encourage you not to shut off or ignore that this is truth for somebody else. If you need to listen to this as prayer requests for you or for your spouse and prayer requests for others, I would encourage you to do that. So there are times in the life of a church when what's taking place doesn't seem like it's necessarily for you. We observed a wedding on Friday. That message actually isn't for everybody. You understand that? That message is for the couple. And we all benefit from it, but that message is for the couple, and we are all observers of that. And so in that moment, we should be praying for this couple. We should be listening to this truth for ourselves and praying that this truth would be applied to them. And there are times in the cycle of a church when that's true of the entire congregation. For example, when we preach a Father's Day message or a Mother's Day message, and we challenge moms or we challenge fathers. It doesn't universally apply to everyone. And so you can always listen to a sermon that may not directly hit you the way that you would like it to, with praying ears. Certainly, if there are aspects of what come out tonight, of what's communicated tonight, that are going to be presented as the ideal, because that's what Scripture often does. It presents marriage the way that God intended it to be, not the way that we've all experienced it. Or not the way so-and-so has experienced it. Maybe you compare someone's life, well, they have a great marriage. I wish I had a marriage like that. You want to be measuring your own life up against God's standard. And there may be a kind of wife or a kind of spouse, not just a wife, principally in this, I know there are, in this congregation, in this setting, that Peter's words apply to you. You need to continue to live out faithfully your calling as a spouse so that through you Christ may win that one. And this is going to equip you to do that. Maybe you're hearing these things with the desire to marry. Well, these things will isolate and frame and restrict, and I use those words on purpose. They don't sound fun. Restrict doesn't sound fun. But they'll restrict and isolate and frame how you should think about the kind of person you want to marry, which you should have pretty tight standards for, spiritual tight standards for. I know some people that they're good people. I think of one person in particular. They're not at Grace Bible Church. And I love this person. I'm friends with this person. I've known this person for a long time. And I think the reason this person's not married is just because they think they need to marry like, Brad Pitt attractiveness. And it's like, it's not going to happen, right? Like, have the right priorities. Have the right priorities. Go after the right things. Your standards need to be godly ones. And so we need to know what godly standards are. So this study is going to help us with that. All right, having said all those things, let's look together at the value of a good spouse. The value of a good spouse. Now, usually I give you one kind of pithy statement, one main idea. And I will say this, it's difficult to do that with this topic in Proverbs because most of the marital instruction or the specifics are in relation to wives. You may have heard, I don't know who originated the line, okay? Everyone attributes it to Jeff Foxworthy, but happy wife, happy life, right? Everyone's heard that line. I don't like that line, okay? Because you should both be endeavoring for the other's happiness, not just the wife's, all right? But happy wife, happy life. If you were to summarize Proverbs' instruction on marriage, it would be this: a wise wife brings a better life. And the men said, amen. A wise wife brings a better life. But to generalize that to everybody, doing marriage God's way contributes to a better life. So, doing marriage God's way means, first of all, valuing our spouse the right way. Valuing our spouse the right way. And this is essential. Because I even just gave you an example, a funny example, and I'm really not exaggerating. I think this person just has unrealistically high physical standards. And that causes this person to make exceptions where it matters most. But I think that this is essential because when we look at our world and our culture, what they value in a human for marriage is often not what God values. They value what can be provided in excess, not just what can be provided. You understand the difference? They want to marry someone not just with a job, but with a good job. They want to marry them for the toys in the garage. They want to marry them for their physical appeal. You say, well, that's not Christians, that's the world. Okay, first of all, that's not true. I wish that were true. But what Christians then do is Christians idealize to the extent of, I think, idolizing a spouse so that we pack all of our hopes and dreams into this person. And when this person inevitably proves that our hopes and dreams are too big for them to bear and they crush under the weight of it and they're not perfect, it causes us not to question sin, but the idea of marriage. Well, maybe I didn't think about this enough. Maybe I didn't go about this the right way, which I'm preaching to the choir here. We have only one really young person in the room, but you're not really young, but young. But the vitality of marital counseling before you get married, just someone who's been married saying, slow down, what you're about to do is awesome and really hard. And it is not Hallmark. And if you wanted it to be Hallmark, you're crazy anyway. Just kidding, if you like Hallmark, all right? Kevin thinks you're crazy. All right. We just came off Christmas. You got to be careful going after Hallmark, right? But we value the wrong things. We place all of our hope and dependence and emotional stability and whatever into this person, and inevitably we're disappointed. Not because we don't love this person anymore, because this person doesn't love us. but because humans can only provide so much. So let's talk about this value. Proverbs 18, verse 22. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Now, this verse is going to set the tone for the valuing and priority and treasuring of the spouse, but it's going to be caveated with other verses. He's not just saying, hey, go find somebody. Anyone will do. If you get married, if you find a wife, it's a good thing. He means a good wife, and that will be made clear as we go along. But if you find a wife, you'll find a good thing and obtain favor from the Lord. Note the spiritual blessing that is given when we find a spiritual marriage. A spiritual marriage brings spiritual blessing. He who finds a wife, and again, I'm going to apply this somewhat reciprocally, finds a good thing. And then the blessing of the Lord is bestowed upon you, obtains the Lord's favor. And gentlemen, I know, my wife's not even here to hear all this, okay? But I know the amount of times, and I know that you would agree with me, where you just think to yourself, how did I luck up like this? Something happens or something's provided for you, and the right word of encouragement is spoken, the hug is given at the right time, and all you can think is just, what a blessing from the Lord. What a blessing from the Lord. And through that person, you understand the favor of the Lord. Proverbs 19:14, you can flip over a page. House and wealth are inherited from fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. So, when I pass on from this world and my wife passes on from this world, our children will receive an inheritance. I don't know how much that is at this point, but or will be. I mean, I do know approximately how much it is at this point, but hopefully we need to go there. I don't know how much it'll be at one point, but there's no value comparative to finding a good spouse. You see, the but there is intended to be a contrast. And it's not like the first line is a bad thing. The first line is a good thing. You should leave an inheritance to your kids. You should set them up and honor them in that way. House and wealth are inherited from fathers. But, and that contrast is a contrast of value. Greater than this, a prudent wife is from the Lord. Gentlemen, if you're in a healthy, loving relationship with your wife and she points you to Christ, not that she's perfect, not that you're perfect, you know how far you are from that. She is a gift from the hand of God. And she constantly gives to your life. Proverbs 12, verse 4. An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who brings shame is like rottenness in his bones. Proverbs 12, verse 4. I didn't mean to go backwards there. I usually like to give them to you chronologically, but I want you to note the imagery here. Excellent wife is the crown of her husband. And just to really press into the image, make sure you understand the poetry. There's emotional and a literal aspect here. Who wears crowns? Kings. An excellent wife makes a king of her husband. Is his beauty, is his strength, is his value. But she who brings shame is like rottenness to his bones. So the specific contrast is one of beauty, it's one of stability. So man, if we know that our wife is of this value, Proverbs 31, the value of a spouse, verse 10, an excellent wife who can find, she is far more precious than jewels. The King James says rubies. It's a more generic Hebrew word there. My dad, when he got a wedding ring or an engagement ring for my mom, got one with a diamond in the middle and two small rubies around it, because he wanted her to remember that her price is far above rubies. And everybody said, oh, But it's a simple way. It's a good way to remind her of her value, not just the value that he ascribes to her, but the value that she ascribes to him. An excellent wife, who can find? There's a rarity there. There's a beauty there. So, men, husbands, again, if this instruction, and certainly the value of it, is weighted mostly towards wives, how are you maintaining, contributing to, and treasuring the precious jewel that is your wife? Are you, as Peter tells us to do, dwelling with her according to understanding? Which sounds much more heady than Peter actually means it. Peter actually means it with an aspect of emotion. He means learn her in every way. Learn her physically, learn her spiritually, and learn her emotionally. Learn her. Ask her questions. Have conversation with her. Husbands, don't be a product of one of the greatest travesties of the current media obsession and technological advances. Say, what is that treasure you're talking about? There's been a few. This is my opinion. In my opinion, one of the greatest tragedies of the current technological advances and media obsession is the loss of the ability to converse. People don't know how to look people in the eye and talk to them, including spouses. I don't know about that. Go to a restaurant and look around. And, okay, be honest. Is it just the teenagers on their phones? In fact, I bet you can find as many adults or people who look like couples as teenagers on their phones. People are nodding their heads. You agree? Spouses, how many of you have found that you went to do something together and before you knew it, you were sitting on the same couch watching the same show, both on your phones? We made a rule in our house. We're going to same screen. We call it same screening. If I pull out my phone, she's going to say, "What are you doing?" And I'll show her whatever I'm looking at. And if she pulls out her phone, I'm going to do the same thing. If we're watching a show, the phones go away. It's like people don't even watch movies together. Husbands, when's the last time you planned a date for your wife and said, "We're going to go," and you went ready to talk, not just ready to eat? Now, to be upfront, usually our dates involve food because I love food. I love food. And so we have date night coming up. I'm excited about it all day because I know we're going to one of our favorite restaurants and we have the same likes in food, so it's going to be awesome. But do you prepare to talk? Think about the day, you think about things coming up, you're thinking about her stresses, you're thinking about the week. You've noticed a few things that you just want to check in with her about and make sure she's all right. You've planned to converse with her. To ask intentional conversations about how she's feeling, about what's on her mind, about where she's discouraged, about what's stressing her out. I heard a conference speaker say once, too many husbands are afraid to ask how their wives are feeling because they're afraid their wives will answer. And the point he was making is that's just selfish. Are you dwelling with her according to understanding? Call her in the middle of the day. Shoot her a text. Ask her how she's doing and things are going at home or things are going at work, depending on whatever your situation in life is. Check in with her. Let her know you're thinking of her, because her price is rare and beautiful. The value of a good spouse. Solomon is going to give some virtues for a good spouse. Some virtues. He actually doesn't give as much time to this as you would think, because what he does mostly is teach from the negative. But he does give a few virtues, or teaching from the positive. Proverbs 31, verse 10 through 12, an excellent wife who can find? She's far more precious than jewels. There's the rarity and the beauty we just talked about. The heart of her husband trusts in her, so she's reliable. She's reliable. He will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. So she contributes rather than denigrates. Did you hear that? She contributes rather than denigrates. She builds up. She does not tear down. Proverbs 31, 26 and 27. She opens her mouth with wisdom, so she's wise. So she's reliable, Proverbs 31. She's wise. And the teaching of kindness, she's kind, is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household. She's responsible and does not eat the bread of idleness. She doesn't waste time. Now, remember, Proverbs 31 should not be necessarily viewed as a checklist. In other words, if you're not perfectly fitting into the mold of Proverbs 31, then you're failing as a wife. That's not the spirit of the chapter at all. The spirit of the chapter is to present this absolutely idealized form of of a wife, so that we have an aspect that we know of what we're going for. But she opens her mouth with wisdom. Ladies, can your husband trust that your counsel will be biblical, rational, and account for the entirety of the situation? Does he know that you will listen? Because remember, wisdom in Proverbs is typically associated with quietness before it is with speech. The teaching of kindness is on her tongue. You've heard me say it before, I think kindness is one of the most misrepresented and underappreciated attributes in the Scriptures. We treat it like it's just a good thing to be if you can be. Kindness is God's heart is kind. He's loving kind towards his people. It's fruit of the Spirit. It's an instruction in the New Testament that we should show kindness to our neighbors in the context of the church and in our families. In the Old Testament, kindness was the people of Israel were instructed to show kindness to one another and to outsiders. Kindness is both an expression and a culture that you set. You express kindness and you show kindness. Kindness is a culture that you build. Is the tone of your marriage gruff, stiff, thoughtless, short? Or is the tone of your marriage appealing, affectionate, understanding, kind? She looks well to the ways of her household. Now, I want to be very, very careful here. I personally believe that this is the way that we run our life. This is my conviction. This is also my opinion. I personally believe that responsibility as a home should be shared. You're one flesh, right? So I believe responsibility as a home should be shared. Now, there are some things that I do that my wife doesn't do, and vice versa. But it doesn't mean we're not willing. Doesn't mean we're not willing. I asked my wife to mow the grass, she probably would. She probably would. But I don't want her to do that. I want the allergies. I don't want her to have the allergies. Right? And I'm kind of afraid she'd not pay attention to the oil. But you know what I mean, right? There are some things that I do that she doesn't do, but not because of a lack of willingness. Because that's how we're expressing thoughtfulness to one another. Truly, one of the most joyous things that we experience as a family is when everyone's in the kitchen and daddy's doing something and mommy's doing something and the olders are doing something and Lily's usually in the way right in the middle of the floor, but she's a part of it. I mean, that is beautiful and joyous. So she looks well to the ways of her household, but husbands, how are you contributing to that? Are you encouraging her in that? A few weeks ago I came home, and I don't remember specifically what it was. I don't remember specifically what it was. It was a tough ministry day for some reason. I don't remember exactly what it was, but my wife knew that, and I came home, and my favorite music was on, and there was a candle going, and the house was clean. It smelled like food. I'm just like, man, life's good, man, because I've got a good wife. It's like, home is awesome. But what if I got home and took that for granted? Just went about my day and didn't say thank you, didn't notice it, or I noticed it, didn't say anything that I noticed it. Because we have 3 kids. Cleaning the house it's not like it's easy, because you've had kids. You start to clean, and as soon as you clean one room, they just move their mess to another room. Husbands, are you thankful? Are you supportive? Are you encouraging? I wonder how often we forget to show gratitude in the ways to us that we think, or it just expresses to our wives, those things are worth forgetting. The simplicity of a clean house, the thoughtfulness of a candle. Husbands, have you ever felt like you were owed something because you put in extra time at work? Or after the day of work, you came home and you mowed the grass, and you got sweaty, you tried to do it the way that she likes it. Did you expect to be noticed? Love her, thank her, support her for her work, and participate in her work and with her. The value of a good spouse, rare and beautiful, the virtues of a good spouse. And now, to teach from the negative, Solomon gives some instruction on the vices of a bad spouse. The vices of a bad spouse. And they are simple. They're summarized. There are four texts I'm going to give you primarily dealing with these vices. Proverbs 21, verse 9. Proverbs 21, verse 9. Truthfully, I hope there's no offensiveness in these verses. I think these verses are kind of comical. I don't know if that's what Solomon was going for, but there's certainly an aspect of comedy to these verses. Proverbs 21, verse 9, it's better to live in the corner of a housetop than in a shared house with a quarrelsome wife. So Solomon's saying, if you have a wife, let's just say spouse. If you have a spouse that's naggy, always arguing, always finding something wrong, always tearing down something, always criticizing you or somebody else, it's better that you have a little tiny corner to live by yourself than a big house with that spouse. It would be better that you had, a New York tiny, expensive apartment by yourself than this whole big house with a quarrelsome spouse. This word quarrel means to resist repeatedly. Resist repeatedly. The idea is that there's a constancy to it. It's always something. It's not just the content, but it's the constancy. Quarrelsome wife. Upping the ante a little bit, Proverbs 21:19, it's better to live in a desert land than with a quarrelsome and fretful woman. I'm going to say spouse because I don't want ladies mad at me, all right? It's better to live in a desert where it's hot and thirsty and dry than to live with a quarrelsome and fretful wife. So now we've heard quarrelsome, and now we're adding a wife who seemingly has her emotional fear out of control. Fretful, anxious. There's always something wrong. Have you ever met somebody who just lives their life up here? You know what I mean? Like everything's up here all the time. And everything's stressful. And since everyone starts their life up here, anything higher than that's just more stressful. We're just getting higher and higher, and the stress follows, and now the stress is multiplying as opposed to, people who just live their lives. Stable. It's going to be okay. Everything's all right. Quarrelsome and fretful woman or spouse, husband. I mean, certainly, and I want to make sure. I know, in marital counseling, I have talked to as many husbands who love to argue probably as wives who love to argue. So certainly this argumentative spirit is not gender specific. But here, the specific understanding is that it takes away from the health of the marriage. It's actually, it's like war. Just with words. And fretful. This is the anxiety and stress that's out of control to the extent that it's taking away from the health of a marriage. What he's not saying to his sons is don't consider marrying a wife who's fearful. Because everybody's fearful of something at some point in their life. What he's saying is don't consider marrying someone who is out of control in regards to their fear. Now, certainly this is the extreme, but how many of you have ever seen the Bob Newhart sketch, Buried Alive in a Box? Has anyone ever seen that? No? Okay, you have to go home and Google it, all right? Well, it's Bob Newhart, and he's a counselor, and this lady comes in with anxiety, and she's afraid she's going to be buried alive in a box. And his counsel for her is, stop it! Stop it! Just don't be scared, You say, well, that's crazy. I talked to somebody last week about a counseling situation, and they were counseling a husband and wife, and the wife just doesn't get out of bed and go to work because she's too afraid of getting in her car, of driving, of other drivers, of what's going to happen at work. Now, obviously, that's the extreme. But my question is, what's happening proactively from the husband's perspective to speak life and give confidence to the extent that she is able to face life more confidently? That's why it's a marital issue. So husbands, are you contributing to the confidence and courage of your wife? Are you contributing to the confidence and courage of your wife? Is she less anxious because of you? Because, and I have a wife who, on the whole, Julie is not a fearful person. But I guarantee she has more anxieties than I do. Do you know why? Because she thinks about more things than I do. She just does. we go to the living room to play a game, and I begin to think about playing with the kid. And so I'm wrestling Leighton, and something happens where, Leighton slips and hits his head. And Julia saw it coming, right? And I didn't see it coming. Do you know why? Because she lives with more concern than I do. Because that's how we think differently. And listen, there is great value to both of those things. Do you know why? Because sons need their dads to wrestle with them and get hurt some. They do. They need to accidentally bump their head. They need to see dad turn the wrong way and go, ouch, because pain happens to dads too. Boys need that, not just sons. Dads are naturally better at letting their kids live with a little risk. They just are. And kids need a little bit of risk. They do. Because you can't wrap them in bubble wrap for their whole life. But I need my wife to help keep my kids alive, right? And so what a beautiful wisdom that God has given man and woman, so that even in its place, concern, not fretfulness, can be used for the betterment of a marriage. This is the verse. It just cracks me up. I don't know why. Proverbs 27:15-16. The continual dripping on a rainy day and a quarrelsome wife are alike. Did you know the Chinese invented a method of torture where water would drip over and over and over? And usually it would drip on the head. And it wasn't just the feeling. It was the sound, the repetition. It was a method of psychological torture. I just think it's... So Solomon's saying, you know that sound that it makes when it rains? Dink, dink, dink. And the kid's like, oh yeah. His son's like, yeah, I understand that. Don't marry somebody like that. Don't marry somebody who's arguing and nagging and always has something contrarian to say and negative to say that takes away from the health of the marriage. You could summarize the vices of the wife in Proverbs, of a bad spouse in Proverbs, two ways. The denigration of unity and the desire for independence. The desire for independence. The denigration of unity and the desire of independence. The second line of verse 16. To restrain her is to restrain the wind or to grasp oil in one's right hand. What's the point he's making? Out of control. You can't do those things. It's like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. To restrain her is like trying to restrain the wind or grasp oil. It's just going to go right through. It's going to run right through. It's out of control. This is someone who wants independence to the denigration of the marriage. Now, spouses, you should want your husband or your wife to be themselves. You should. You should not desire a clone of you. God has made them uniquely, and you need them uniquely. We laugh, usually there's a chill one in a marriage and a high-strung one in a marriage. We don't have that in our marriage. Neither my wife or myself are chill. We know that. We're self-aware. We are not chill people. But what we've gotten good at is her being chill when I need her to be, and me being chill when she needs me to be. Rather than forcing our spouse into a mold so they are more likable to us or acceptable to us, we want them to be themselves within the context of oneness. Oneness is not just becoming alike in personality. Or even in happiness, what makes you happy? I made a Hallmark joke earlier. My wife loves Hallmark. I don't know how or why, but she does. So we can be very different, but still desire, different in our personalities and our gifts yet, but still desire that those differences contribute to oneness rather than denigrate that oneness. And one of the great problems that I see in the modern view of the family is not that both people are working. I have no problem with that. Proverbs 31 doesn't have a problem with that. She rises up early and she goes out and she sells and she's an entrepreneur. But it contributes to the home. It doesn't denigrate from the home. The problem is when dad goes to work and the kids miss dad, and when mom goes to work and the kids miss mom, and they're not contributing to the home, they're contributing to their careers. And so who's left to miss them? Their kids. And by the way, God designed kids to really need their parents in every stage of their development. So the vices of a bad spouse are the denigration of unity because of the pursuit of independence, a lack of control, disunity, or if you want to simplify it, disunity through rebellion. Disunity through rebellion. Independence and individuality overtakes unity and the togetherness of a marriage. So, spouses, husbands and wives, not just ladies, do your words contribute life and build up, or do you often have something negative and critical to say? They didn't do it right, they didn't say it right, he got it wrong from the grocery store again. He didn't get the right product. The world will go on. It'll be okay. It's not the right kind of whatever. It's all right. You'll probably all survive. It's just the wrong laundry detergent. It's not a big deal. Yeah, but it happened last time, so? Is it worth a fight? Is it worth that? Maybe we just ask ourselves the question on the front side a lot more. Is it worth where we're about to go? Is it worth where we're about to go? Because the other person's worth is far more important than what I believe to be important. Are anxieties and individualities and personal desires for control denigrating the oneness of your marriage? Are you building up or tearing down? Do your kids hear you arguing regularly, or is it an exceptional circumstance? And when they do hear you argue, do they hear you ask forgiveness? Do they know daddy will come to them or mommy will come to them and say, look, mommy and daddy shouldn't talk to each other like that, and we're sorry you had to hear it? So that it's the exception, not the norm. I wanted to share with you, by way of conclusion, just to bring this to a factual, literal, measurable circumstance or understanding, so that you see marriage done God's way and its immediate effects. I looked up a bunch of articles this week about the effects on marriage physically, psychologically, and spiritually. I won't go through all of them, I'll just give you a few. Married individuals live longer on average. A study in 2011 found that being married reduced the risk of premature death by 24% compared to those who were unmarried. It's better for the heart. A study in 2014 found that married people had 5% less of a lower risk of cardiovascular diseases compared to those who were divorced or never married. It improves the quickness of recovery from illness. It lowers the risk of chronic conditions. Significantly lower rates in depression, anxiety, increase significantly higher. I'm not going to read all the numbers for you. I can send them to you if you want. Increased higher statistics of life satisfaction, better stress management, fewer heart attacks, physically healthier lifestyles, reduced risk of risk-taking behaviors. Now, we know that's just the women helping the men not do crazy things in their life, like, think with guns and such. But reduced risk-taking behaviors, stronger sense of purpose. Multiple studies indicate that married individuals feel a greater sense of meaning and purpose in life. But here was the primary caveat in all of these studies. This is not directly about individual benefits. Married couples often provide a more stable environment for children and family and society improvement if the marriages are healthy. And that was the caveat on all of these studies. If the marriages are healthy. And in agreement with Solomon, the studies related to those who have known the pain of a broken marriage or abuse or messy divorces, the health, physical, emotional, and psychological health is almost the exact opposite of all those positive statistics that I gave you. Marriage done God's way really is best. So what should we do? We should pursue marriage God's way. We should pray for it as we pursue it. We should pray for ourselves that we would be the spouses that God intends. Because marriage done with God's wisdom brings a better life. Grandparents, have these conversations with your grandkids. Parents, have these conversations with your kids. Teach them the value of marrying the right person. Teach them what the right person is by your own marriage and living it out yourself. If you know the negatives, teach them of the negatives and warn them. There is no greater gift and beauty in this life than marriage. And there are few true, lasting, emotional, physical, and spiritual contributors in this life than healthy marriage. So the church must uphold it. Families must teach it. That we may know its joy, its beauty, and its spiritual benefit.